Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because at 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you.
Caliph moved silently through the dimly lit corridors of a syndicate outpost, her boots making no sound against the cold metallic floor. Her target, a high-ranking smuggler, thought he was safe behind layers of guards and security systems. He was wrong. From the shadows, Caliph observed her surroundings, calculating every movement. The guards were predictable, their patrols routine. She moved with inhuman precision, her form blending seamlessly with the darkness. When she struck, it was over in seconds, a flurry of motion, followed by silence. Inside the smuggler's office, her target barely had time to react before her blade was pressed against his throat. "Caliph," he stammered, his face pale. "The broker doesn't need this. We can negotiate." "You broke the syndicate's rules," Caliph said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "There's no negotiation." With a single, clean motion, she completed her mission. Blood pooled on the floor as she turned and walked away, leaving no trace but the echo of her departure. Back at the syndicate headquarters, Caliph received her next assignment. The broker, the shadowy leader of the organization, handed her a slim data tablet. "Lucas Kane," the broker said, his voice smooth and calculated. "A former engineer. He fled with critical research that belongs to us. Find him. Kill him. Bring back the data." Caliph glanced at the tablet. The image showed a man in his late 30s, with dark hair and tired eyes. He didn't look like a threat, but Caliph never questioned her orders. "Consider it done," she said, slipping the tablet into her belt. "You have 3 days," the broker added. "Do not fail." Caliph's search led her to the far edges of the galaxy, to a quiet farming colony nestled on a remote moon. The place was unremarkable, a patchwork of humble homes and sprawling fields, far from the syndicate's reach, or so the residents believed. She found Lucas Kane easily enough. He lived in a modest home on the outskirts of the colony, tending to his crops. But what caught Caliph off guard was the small girl playing in the yard, her laughter carrying on the breeze. The sight of Lucas crouching beside his daughter, helping her plant flowers, stopped Caliph in her tracks. She watched them from a distance, her sharp eyes scanning for vulnerabilities. Yet, instead of weaknesses, she found herself observing their bond. The way Lucas smiled at the girl. The way she clung to him with unshakable trust. For the first time in her career, Caliph hesitated. Later that night, Caliph positioned herself on a hill overlooking Lucas's home, her rifle steady as she peered through the scope. He was inside, reading to the girl by the light of a single lamp. The scene was achingly simple, yet it stirred something in Caliph that she couldn't name. Her finger hovered over the trigger. One shot. That's all it would take. But she didn't fire. Instead, she lowered the rifle and stepped back into the shadows, her mind racing. What was wrong with her? She had killed without question, without hesitation, countless times before. Why was this different? Caliph clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling beneath her calm exterior. The mission wasn't about the girl, she told herself. Lucas was her target, and her orders were clear. Yet deep down, Caliph knew the truth. For the first time, she saw something she had never allowed herself to believe in. A life untouched by fear and violence. The next morning, Caliph approached Lucas directly. She waited until the girl was playing outside before stepping into his field, her presence startling him. "Who are you?" he asked, instinctively moving to shield the girl from view. Caliph removed her hood, her striking features framed by her jet-black hair. "Your past has caught up with you, Lucas Kane." Lucas tensed, his expression darkening. "The syndicate sent you." Caliph tilted her head. "You're remarkably calm for a man who knows he's been marked for death." "I don't have the luxury of fear," Lucas replied, his voice steady. "Not when I have her to protect." His defiance intrigued Caliph. Most of her targets begged for their lives or tried to escape. Lucas did neither. "What's so important about the data you stole?" she asked, taking a step closer. Lucas hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know, do you? You're just a weapon to them." Caliph's expression didn't change, but his words hit harder than she expected. "I'm the one asking questions, Lucas." He took a deep breath, glancing toward his daughter. "It's an energy source. Clean, limitless, and powerful enough to change everything. The syndicate wants to weaponize it, and I couldn't let that happen." Caliph studied him, her mind racing. His words rang true, but it wasn't just his explanation that gave her pause. It was his unwavering resolve to protect his daughter, no matter the cost. For the first time, Caliph began to question the syndicate's orders. As Caliph left the field, she felt a weight pressing on her chest. Her mission was clear, but something inside her had shifted. She feared nothing, no one, but Lucas Kane and his daughter were unlike anything she'd encountered before. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, she couldn't pull the trigger. The hunter had become unsure, and that made her dangerous, to herself and to the syndicate. Caliph crouched atop a ridge overlooking Lucas Kane's modest home. She had observed him for days, memorizing his movements and cataloging every detail. Yet, the more she watched, the less he resembled any target she'd ever pursued. He wasn't a criminal or a warrior. He was just a father. Lucas spent his days working the land, maintaining a small greenhouse, and most importantly, caring for his daughter Lila. Caliph's sharp eyes followed every interaction between them, the way he carried her on his shoulders when she got tired, how he laughed when she told stories, and the tenderness in his gaze when he thought no one was watching. Caliph didn't understand it. She didn't want to understand it. Emotions were a weakness she had purged from herself long ago. Her mission was simple: eliminate the target. Yet every time she prepared to act, an unfamiliar hesitation gripped her. She hated it. One evening, Caliph decided to confront Lucas directly. The syndicate wouldn't wait forever, and she needed answers. Cloaked in shadows, she slipped into his greenhouse, where Lucas was sorting tools. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice low and steady. Lucas froze, his hands stilling over a wrench. "Lila's inside," he said quietly. "She doesn't need to see this." Caliph stepped closer, her twin daggers glinting under the pale light. "You know who I am." Lucas nodded, turning to face her slowly. His dark eyes betrayed no fear. "The syndicate sent you. You're here to kill me." Caliph tilted her head, studying him. "You don't seem surprised." "I've been waiting for them to catch up," Lucas replied, his tone calm. "But I won't let them take her." Caliph's grip on her daggers tightened. "If you're so willing to die, why run in the first place?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "Because I'm all she has. And she's all I have." Caliph faltered for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough for Lucas to catch. He straightened, his eyes narrowing. "You're hesitating." Her expression hardened. "Don't test me." "I'm not," Lucas said firmly. "I just want to know why you haven't already killed me." Caliph didn't respond. She hated how perceptive he was. Instead, she gestured with her dagger. "What's in the data? What makes it worth your life?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "An energy source. It's powerful enough to revolutionize the galaxy. Clean, renewable, limitless. But in the wrong hands, it could destroy worlds." "And you think the syndicate would use it as a weapon?" "I know they would," Lucas snapped. "I saw what they were willing to do just to get a prototype. I couldn't let them have it." Caliph stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then why not destroy it?" Lucas shook his head. "It's more than data. It's hope. Hope for a galaxy that doesn't have to rely on syndicates or empires. If I destroy it, they win. If I hand it over, they win. My only choice was to run." Caliph stared at him, her mind churning. His words made sense, but they weren't enough to explain the weight pressing on her chest. Something about him, his determination, his willingness to sacrifice everything for his daughter, stirred something buried deep within her. She hated it. Caliph left Lucas alive that night, retreating to the shadows. She told herself she needed time to strategize, but in truth, she was conflicted. Killing him would be easy, but the thought of leaving Lila without a father unsettled her in ways she didn't understand. The next day, her hesitation cost her. Another syndicate assassin arrived, a hulking alien mercenary named Grovan. He was direct, brutal, and efficient, and unlike Caliph, he didn't hesitate. Caliph spotted him first, his heavy steps crunching through the dirt as he approached Lucas's home. Lila played in the yard, oblivious to the danger. Lucas stepped out of the house, his face hardening when he saw Grovan. "Lucas Kane," Grovan growled. "The syndicate doesn't wait. You should have stayed hidden." Before Lucas could respond, Caliph struck. She leapt from the shadows, her daggers flashing in the sunlight. Groven roared, spinning to meet her, but she was faster. Her blades sliced through his armor, finding vulnerable joints. "Caliph," Groven snarled, blocking her next strike. "You've gone soft." "Not soft," she hissed, driving a blade into his shoulder. "Just smarter than you." The fight was brutal but brief. Calith's precision and agility outmatched Groven's brute strength, and he fell to the ground with a final guttural growl. Blood pooled beneath him as his eyes glazed over. Caliph turned to find Lucas standing at the door, holding a plasma rifle he hadn't fired. Lila peeked out from behind him, her wide eyes full of fear and confusion. "You saved us," Lucas said slowly, lowering the weapon. Caliph wiped her blades clean, her expression unreadable. "The Syndicate will send more. You need to leave." Lucas stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Why are you helping us? Why risk your life for people you don't even know?" Caliph hesitated, her usual coldness faltering. She glanced at Lila, then back at Lucas. Because she shouldn't have to grow up alone. Lucas's expression softened, and for the first time, Caliph saw something she hadn't expected: trust. "I don't know how we'll survive," Lucas said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But if you're willing to fight with us, we might have a chance." Caliph sheathed her daggers, her decision made. "I'm not fighting with you. I'm fighting for her." For the first time in her life, Caliph wasn't just an assassin. She was something more. And for the first time she felt fear, not for herself, but for what she might lose. Caliph sat in the cramped cockpit of the Wayfarer, staring at the controls as Lucas worked to plot a safe course to their next destination. Lila was asleep in the small cabin behind them, her breathing soft and even, a stark contrast to the chaos that had become their lives. "You said they'll send more," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "How many more?" Caliph didn't look at him. "As many as it takes. The Syndicate doesn't accept failure, and now I've made them look weak. They'll come for all of us." Lucas leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "So what do we do? Keep running forever." Caliph finally turned to face him, her golden eyes cold but steady. "We fight. But to do that, we need time, resources, and allies. None of which we have right now." Lucas scoffed, his voice bitter. "Allies? Who would help us against the Syndicate?" Caliph hesitated. She hated to admit it, but Lucas was right. The Syndicate's reach was vast, and its reputation for vengeance was enough to keep most people in line. Still, she couldn't let him see her doubt. "We'll figure it out," she said, her tone firm. The journey to their next hiding place was fraught with tension. Lucas worked tirelessly to modify the ship systems, creating decoys and scrambling signals to throw off any pursuers. Caliph, meanwhile, trained. She turned the cargo bay into a makeshift sparring area, honing her already razor-sharp skills. Lila watched her sometimes, wide-eyed and curious. At first, Caliph ignored the girl's presence, but over time, she began explaining her movements and techniques. Lila soaked it all in, mimicking her stances with an enthusiasm that surprised Caliph. "Why do you fight so much?" Lila asked one day, her small voice echoing in the bay. Caliph paused mid-swing, her blade still in the air. The question caught her off guard. "Because I have to," she said simply. "But you don't like it, do you?" Caliph lowered the blade, looking at the girl. For a moment, she saw a reflection of herself as a child, before the Syndicate, before the endless cycle of violence. "No," she admitted quietly. "I don't." Lila smiled, as if Caliph's honesty was a gift. "Maybe you could fight for something else someday. Like us." Caliph didn't respond, but something in her chest tightened. Their temporary refuge was a small barren moon orbiting a dying star. It was far from any major trade routes, and Caliph had chosen it precisely for its desolation. Yet, even there, danger found them. The attack came at night. Syndicate agents descended like vultures, their ships piercing the atmosphere with shrieking engines. Caliph was the first to react, leaping from her bunk and grabbing her weapons. "Lila, stay with me!" Lucas shouted, pulling his daughter close as the walls of their makeshift shelter shook. Caliph didn't wait for orders. She burst outside, her daggers gleaming in the dim light of the moon's surface. Syndicate enforcers were advancing, their weapons trained on the structure. Caliph moved like a shadow, weaving between their ranks with deadly precision. She took down 3 before the rest realized what was happening. Plasma bolts lit the air, forcing her into cover. Inside, Lucas was frantically trying to get their ship ready for an emergency takeoff. "Kalith, we need more time," he shouted through the comms. Kalith pressed her back against a rock, her breath steady despite the chaos. "You have 5 minutes. That's all I can give you." 5 minutes. Lucas muttered, shaking his head. "We need 10. Then work faster," she snapped, leaping from cover to engage another group of enforcers. The battle was brutal. Kalith's movements were fluid and lethal, but the Syndicate's forces were relentless. For every agent she took down, 2 more seemed to appear. She could feel her energy waning, but she refused to stop. Lucas finally got the Wayfarer ready to launch. "Kalith, we're set." Kalith sprinted toward the ship, her feet kicking up dust as Syndicate forces fired after her. She reached the ramp just as it began to lift, spinning to fire one last shot at their pursuers before collapsing inside. "Go!" she shouted, and Lucas didn't hesitate. The ship roared to life, ascending rapidly into the atmosphere. Later, as the Wayfarer drifted through hyperspace, Kalith sat alone in the cargo bay, her body aching from the fight. Lila appeared at the door, clutching a blanket. "Are you okay?" the girl asked, her voice small. Kalith looked up, surprised. "I'm fine." "You got hurt," Lila insisted, stepping closer. "It's nothing I can't handle," Kalith said, her tone softer than usual. Lila hesitated, then held out the blanket. "Here. It helps me when I'm scared." Kalith stared at the girl, unsure how to respond. Finally, she took the blanket, the gesture leaving her momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign but not unwelcome. That night, Kalith sat in the cockpit with Lucas, staring out at the stars. "I don't know why you're doing this," Lucas said quietly. "But thank you." Kalith didn't look at him. "I'm not doing it for you." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I don't think you are. But whatever your reasons, you're saving us. And that means something." Kalith finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what this is, Lucas. But if I'm going to protect you and Lila, I need to know something. Are you willing to fight for her? No matter what it takes." Lucas met her gaze, his voice steady. "I already am." For the first time, Kalith allowed herself to believe him. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't fighting alone. The Wayfarer dropped out of hyperspace near a desolate planet shrouded in swirling clouds of ash and debris. It wasn't a sanctuary, but it wasn't meant to be. This was where Kalith had decided to make her stand. If the Syndicate wanted Lucas Kane and his daughter, they would have to go through her first. Lucas piloted the ship into a cavernous ravine, the jagged rocks above providing some cover from scanning equipment. Lila sat beside him, nervously clutching her stuffed toy, a battered rabbit she'd carried since they fled their home. Kalith stood behind them, her golden eyes fixed on the landscape ahead. "This won't hold them for long," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "It doesn't have to," Lucas replied, glancing back at her. "You're sure about this?" Kalith nodded. "They're not just coming for you anymore. They want me too. If I take the fight to them, it'll buy you time to get away." "No," Lucas said firmly, standing to face her. "I'm not leaving you behind. We're in this together." Kalith's expression softened, but only slightly. "You won't survive without me." "Then we won't survive," Lucas countered. "But I'm not letting you fight them alone. And neither is she." He gestured to Lila, who was staring at Kalith with wide, unblinking eyes. Kalith hesitated, her icy demeanor cracking. She crouched down to meet Lila's gaze. "I promised to protect you. That means I have to do things you might not understand." Lila shook her head, her small voice trembling but firm. "You're not going away. You're part of us now." Kalith blinked, momentarily stunned. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd come to care for this fragile, determined little family, or how much they'd come to care for her. The Syndicate's fleet arrived sooner than expected, their sleek ships cutting through the ash-filled skies. From the cockpit, Lucas counted at least a dozen smaller craft and one looming command ship. "We can't outgun them," he said, his tone grim. "We don't need to," Kalith replied, her voice sharp and focused. "We just need to make them regret coming here." She activated the ship's rudimentary defenses, setting automated turrets to target anything that got too close. Then she armed herself, daggers, pistols, and a plasma rifle she'd salvaged from one of the Syndicate's own enforcers. Lucas watched her with a mix of awe and apprehension. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" Kaleth smirked, a faint glint of confidence in her eyes. "I'm always planning." As the first wave of Syndicate ships descended, Kaleth moved like a force of nature. She darted between cover, her weapons striking with deadly precision. Explosions lit the ravine as the automated turrets joined the fray, forcing the Syndicate to divert resources to eliminate the defenses. Lucas, despite his inexperience, fought alongside her. His engineering background allowed him to rig traps and sabotage the Syndicate's equipment, slowing their advance. Together, they created chaos, making the Syndicate pay dearly for every inch of ground they gained. Inside the Wayfarer, Lila hid in the cargo bay, clutching her stuffed rabbit and whispering to herself. She wasn't crying. Kaleth had told her not to be afraid, and she trusted her. But she couldn't stop worrying about what would happen if Kaleth and her father didn't come back. As the battle raged, Kaleth faced her greatest challenge yet, the arrival of the broker. The Syndicate's enigmatic leader descended from the command ship, flanked by elite enforcers. His appearance was unsettling, a tall, wiry figure with a mechanical faceplate and an aura of quiet menace. "Kaleth," the broker said, his voice amplified through a modulator. "You've caused quite a mess. But it ends here." Kaleth didn't flinch. "You should have stayed in your ship." The broker chuckled, a hollow, mechanical sound. "Do you really think you can defeat me? You're nothing without the Syndicate." Kaleth's eyes narrowed. "I'm more than you'll ever be." The ensuing fight was brutal. The broker was no ordinary opponent. His movements were unnaturally fast, his attacks precise and relentless. Kaleth matched him blow for blow, her training and instincts keeping her alive, but she could feel herself tiring. Lucas, watching from a distance, saw Kaleth falter for the first time. Without thinking, he grabbed a plasma rifle and joined the fight, firing at the enforcers who flanked the broker. "Get out of here, Lucas!" Kaleth shouted, parrying a strike from the broker. "Not without you!" Lucas yelled back, taking down one of the enforcers. The distraction was enough. Kaleth seized the moment, driving one of her daggers into the broker's side. Sparks flew as the blade pierced his augmented armor, and the broker staggered, his voice modulator crackling. "You'll regret this," he rasped, retreating toward his ship. Kaleth didn't give him the chance. With a final, ferocious strike, she ended him. The broker fell, his lifeless body crumpling to the ground. The surviving Syndicate forces retreated after their leader's death, their morale shattered. Kaleth collapsed to her knees, bloodied and exhausted, as Lucas ran to her side. "You did it," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and admiration. "We did it," she corrected, leaning on him as he helped her back to the ship. Inside, Lila ran to Kaleth, throwing her arms around her despite the blood and dirt. "You're okay." Kaleth hesitated before returning the embrace, her usually cold demeanor melting under the child's warmth. As the Wayfarer drifted through hyperspace once more, Lucas sat beside Kaleth in the cockpit. "What now?" he asked. Kaleth stared out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. "The Syndicate isn't gone. They'll rebuild. But for now, we've bought ourselves some peace." Lucas nodded. "And after that?" She turned to him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "After that, we make sure Lila never has to live in fear again." For the first time in her life, Kaleth felt something other than duty or survival. She felt purpose. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone.